her body on the cold stone, pale, still, her dress stained with dirt, her hands open, palms facing the sky, as if she had tried to catch herself, but failed. The twins were screaming beside her, their voices raw, their faces wet with tears they couldn't stop. And the millionaire who paid her salary every month without fail didn't even know her last name. Marcus had just stepped out of his black imported car when he heard the screaming. The engine was still warm, his briefcase still in hand, his mind still replaying the numbers from the board meeting that had run 3 hours too long. But the sound cut through everything. He dropped the briefcase and ran. When he reached the gate, he saw her. The woman who cleaned his house, the woman his sons called Miss Clarice. She was lying on the ground, motionless, her face turned to the side, her lips slightly parted, her chest barely moving. The twins were kneeling beside her, shaking her shoulders, crying her name over and over. "Miss Clarice! Wake up! Please, wake up!" Marcus felt his legs go weak for a moment. Then something in him switched on. He crouched down, pressed 2 fingers to her neck. There was a pulse, faint, but there. "She's alive," he said, more to himself than to them. "She's still alive." He lifted her in his arms, carefully, desperately. She weighed almost nothing, as if life had already begun to leave her body. The twins ran behind him, their small feet slapping against the stone path, crying and stumbling. "Is she going to die, Dad? Is Miss Clarice going to die?" Marcus didn't answer, because he didn't know. He placed her gently in the back seat of his car. Her face was pale, covered in cold sweat. Her breathing, weak, but still there. He took off his expensive suit jacket and folded it carefully under her head, like a pillow. The boys climbed into the car, still sobbing. One of them held Clarice's hand. The other pressed his forehead against the window, watching her reflection in the glass. Marcus started the engine. His hands were shaking. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He drove toward the hospital like a man running from a fire he couldn't see. The streets blurred past. Red lights became suggestions. Speed limits became memories. He didn't care. All he could think about was the woman in his back seat, the woman he had never once spoken to directly, and the desperate fear in his children's eyes. Every 5 seconds, he looked in the rearview mirror, checking, hoping, praying she was still breathing. Sweat ran down his forehead. His shirt clung to his back. The air conditioning was on full blast, but it didn't matter. The heat came from somewhere inside him, somewhere he hadn't felt in years. And then one of his sons asked, with a thin, broken voice, "Dad, is Miss Clarice going to die?" Marcus felt his chest tighten, like a fist squeezing his heart, like all the air had been sucked out of the car. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He had never seen his children this desperate for anyone, not when their grandmother passed away, not when their dog got sick, not even when their own mother, his wife, died 2 years ago after a long battle with illness. They had cried then, yes, but not like this, not with this raw, primal terror. And that confused him. Who was this woman? How had she entered their lives so deeply? She had only been working at the mansion for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. That was nothing. That was less than a business quarter. That was less time than it took to close a decent deal. But his sons were crying for her like she was family, like she was their mother. Marcus barely knew anything about Clarice. The new housekeeper had been hired by Nyosa, the estate manager, an older woman who had worked for his family for over a decade. She handled all the staff, the gardeners, the drivers, the cooks, the cleaners. Marcus never got involved. He didn't have time. He didn't have interest. As long as the house was clean and his meals were ready and his suits were pressed, he didn't care who did it. He left before sunrise, came home after dark. Sometimes he didn't come home at all, just slept in his office downtown or in a hotel near the airport before an early flight. He spent his weeks drowning in meetings, contracts, negotiations, last-minute flights to São Paulo, to New York, to Dubai. Dinners with clients in restaurants where a single bottle of wine cost more than most people earned in a month. Corporate events where everyone smiled and no one meant it. Everything that involved money. Everything that involved power. But nothing that involved his sons. Nothing that involved presence. And now, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, he realized something was very wrong. It wasn't normal for a housekeeper to collapse at his gate. It wasn't normal for his sons to cry like this for her. It wasn't normal for him to feel an anguish he hadn't felt in years, for a woman he didn't even know. He parked at the emergency entrance, didn't bother finding a proper spot, didn't bother locking the doors, just stopped the car, threw it into park, and jumped out. He opened the back door and lifted Clarice again. She was still unconscious. Her head rolled against his shoulder. Her arms hung limp at her sides. He carried her into the hospital, shouting for help with a voice raw from desperation. "Someone help! She collapsed. She's not waking up." 2 nurses came running with a stretcher. They asked rapid questions. Had she hit her head? Did she have any conditions? Was she on medication? Had she convulsed? Had she vomited? Marcus couldn't answer any of them. "I found her unconscious on my property," he said, breathless. "That's all I know. She was cold. She wouldn't wake up. I don't know anything else." The nurses exchanged a worried look. Then they wheeled Clarice away, through the double doors, behind frosted glass walls. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him. The smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils. His heart pounded in his ears. His sons clung to his legs, one on each side, trembling, sniffling. Their small bodies pressed against him like they were afraid of being swept away. He crouched down and held them both at once, felt their little hearts racing against his chest. "She's going to be okay," he said. "I promise." He didn't know if it was true, or just a lie to calm them down. They waited. 1 hour, then 2. Marcus sat on a plastic chair in the hallway, staring at the frosted glass doors. The twins sat on the floor beside him, their backs against the wall, holding each other's hands. They had stopped crying, but their eyes were still red, their faces still swollen. Every few minutes, one of them would look up at the doors, then look back down. Marcus checked his phone. 37 unread messages, 14 missed calls, 3 voicemails from his business partner, 2 from his secretary, 1 from a client in Hong Kong. He put the phone back in his pocket without reading any of them. For the first time in years, work could wait. Finally, the doors opened. A doctor walked out. A young woman in a white coat holding a clipboard, her expression serious. She scanned the hallway, saw Marcus, and walked toward him. He stood up too fast, felt the blood rush from his head, steadied himself against the wall. "Are you the one who brought her in?" the doctor asked. "Yes. How is she? Is she okay?" The doctor paused, looked at him for a moment, then spoke carefully. "She's awake now. We stabilized her. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, likely from severe dehydration and prolonged malnutrition. Her body simply shut down as a form of protection." Marcus felt the words hit him one by one. Dehydration, malnutrition, shut down. The doctor continued, "When was the last time she had a proper meal?" He didn't know how to answer. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence said everything. The doctor's tone sharpened. She's been working far beyond her body's capacity and eating far less than she should. This is extremely dangerous. If it continues, she could face cardiac arrhythmia, organ failure, or worse. She paused, looked at him directly. I don't know what kind of work she was doing for you, but whatever it was killing her. Marcus felt the shame rise in his chest like bile, hot, bitter, suffocating. He asked to see her. The doctor hesitated, then agreed. She led him to a small room at the end of the hall. The door was open. Inside, Clarice was lying on a narrow hospital bed, an IV tube in her arm, a thin blanket covering her legs. Her face was still pale, but there was more color than before. Her eyes were open, tired, heavy, as if even keeping her eyelids up was too much effort. She saw him and immediately tried to sit up. Please, sir, I'm so sorry for the trouble. I didn't mean to cause any problems. I'll be back to work tomorrow, I promise. I just need— He raised his hand gently. Stop. She froze. You're not going back tomorrow, he said, or the day after. You're going to rest as long as you need. She shook her head, panic rising in her eyes. But sir, I need this job. I can't lose it. My mother is sick. She needs medicine every day. I'm the only one who can buy it. If I lose this job, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know what will happen to her. Her voice broke. Tears began to fall. Marcus felt his chest cave in. You think I would fire you for being sick? He asked quietly. She looked down at her hands. Her fingers trembled. Everyone does, sir. I've worked in many houses. I've seen people get fired for much less. A broken plate, a stain on a shirt, a day off requested at the wrong time. We learn to stay quiet, to endure everything, to never complain, to work until we fall. She paused. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because if we fall, at least we fell working. At least no one can say we didn't try. Marcus stood there in silence, processing, understanding for the first time the weight she had been carrying alone. He had always paid on time. He had always been polite. He had never yelled at anyone, never insulted anyone, never treated his staff with cruelty. He thought that was enough. But now, looking at this woman, pale, weak, terrified of losing her job even while lying in a hospital bed, he realized it had never been enough. Paying on time wasn't kindness. It was obligation. Being polite wasn't respect. It was distance. He had treated his staff like furniture, clean, functional, invisible, and Clarice had nearly died because of it. He called Noosa that night. The estate manager answered on the second ring, her voice already worried. Sir, I heard what happened. Is she okay? I feel terrible. I should have. Why didn't you tell me she was sick? Silence. Noosa, answer me. She sighed. She fainted twice before, sir. Once in the laundry room, once in the kitchen. I gave her some blood pressure medication I take myself. I told her to rest, but she kept working. She said she couldn't afford to stop. And you didn't think to tell me? I thought she was exaggerating. These young women sometimes, they complain a lot. I thought she just needed to push through. I didn't realize it was this serious. Marcus felt the anger rise. She collapsed at my gate, Noosa, in front of my children. They thought she was dead. Noosa was silent. You saw her working while she could barely stand, and you did nothing. I gave her medicine. Medicine is not rest. Medicine is not food. Medicine is not help. He hung up without saying goodbye. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, a king-size mattress that felt too big, too cold, too empty, and stared at the ceiling. His wife used to sleep beside him. She used to reach for his hand in the middle of the night. She used to hum lullabies when she couldn't sleep. But she was gone. 2 years gone. And he had buried himself in work so deep that he had forgotten what it felt like to be home. He got up, walked down the hall, opened the door to his son's room. They were asleep, both of them in the same bed, even though they each had their own. They were holding hands, their faces still a little swollen from crying. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching them breathe. When was the last time he had done this? When was the last time he had tucked them in, read them a story, listened to them talk about their day? He couldn't remember. The next morning, Marcus went back to the hospital. The twins came with him, bouncing in the back seat, asking questions the whole way. Is Miss Clarice awake? Can we see her? Did she eat breakfast? Is she still sick? When is she coming home? Marcus answered patiently. Yes, I think so. A little. Soon. When they arrived, the doctor said Clarice was ready to be discharged. She was stable, but she needed rest. Real rest. Not the kind where you pretend to sit down for 5 minutes before getting up again. Marcus nodded. I understand. He found Clarice sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed in clean clothes that Noosa had brought earlier that morning. Her face looked better. Still tired, but less gray, less hollow. The twins ran to her immediately. They hugged her legs, buried their faces in her lap, cried again, but this time with relief. Miss Clarice, you're okay. We were so scared. She stroked their hair gently, her own eyes filled with tears. I'm okay, boys. I'm okay. I'm so sorry I scared you. Marcus watched from the doorway. Something inside him shifted. Something he couldn't name. On the drive home, the twins sat in the back with Clarice. They refused to let go of her hands. And then, halfway through the ride, one of them spoke up. Dad, we thought you were going to fire her. Marcus looked in the rearview mirror. What? Like the other lady, the other twin said, his voice trembling. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What other lady? The boys looked at each other. Then one of them continued. The one who took care of us when Mom was sick. She stayed with us every day. She made us food. She read us stories. But one day she got a fever. She asked to leave early. And you said no. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. You said we had guests coming, that she needed to stay. She cried in the kitchen, and the next day, she never came back. The car was silent. Marcus remembered now. He had forgotten about it, buried it like everything else. But his children hadn't. I was wrong, he said, his voice low. I know that now. Clarice looked at him from the back seat. Her voice was soft. He's not cruel, boys. He's just afraid. Afraid of losing people. Afraid of feeling too much. So he keeps everyone at a distance, even you. Marcus didn't turn around, but his voice cracked when he answered. She's right. I've been running from loss for so long. I forgot I was losing what mattered most. That evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He sat on the edge of his son's bed. Both of them. Together. The room was quiet. The curtains were drawn. A small nightlight glowed in the corner, casting soft shadows on the wall. One of the twins looked up at him. Dad, are you going to disappear again? Marcus felt the words cut into him. Disappear. That's what he had been doing. Not leaving, not traveling. Disappearing. I'm going to leave for work sometimes, he said carefully. but I'll always come back. And when I can't come back the same day, I'll tell you. I'll explain. You can call me any time. I'll always answer." The other twin frowned. "You promise." "I promise." They didn't fully believe him. He could see it in their eyes. The doubt, the fear, the memory of too many broken promises. But they were a little less afraid. And that was a start. The next morning, Marcus went to Clarice's room, the small guest room in the back of the house where she had been resting. He knocked. She answered from inside. "Come in." He opened the door and found her sitting on the bed looking out the window at the garden. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better, sir, thank you." He sat down on the chair across from her. "Clarice, I need to understand something. The doctor said you were malnourished, that you hadn't been eating properly for weeks. Why?" She didn't answer at first, just looked down at her hands. Then, slowly, she spoke. "When I first came here, I thought I would just clean. That's what Noosa said. Clean the house, do the laundry, keep things tidy." She paused. "But then I met your sons." She told him everything. How the twins had been silent when she first arrived. How they barely spoke to anyone. How they ate their meals alone in the kitchen while the rest of the staff worked around them. How she had started sitting with them, talking to them, asking them about their favorite colors, their favorite animals, their favorite games. How they had slowly opened up, started laughing again, started playing again. How she had begun cooking for them, special meals, with extra care, the way her own mother used to cook for her when she was small. How she had started putting them to bed, singing them songs, staying until they fell asleep. How she had noticed that they flinched when they heard footsteps in the hallway, because they were always afraid someone was coming to tell them bad news. How she had learned that they hadn't been hugged in months. "I didn't mean to become their mother," she said quietly. "I just couldn't leave them alone." Marcus listened in silence. Every word was a knife. Every detail was a wound. His sons had been suffering, right under his roof, right under his nose, and he had been too busy, too absent, to notice. "Why didn't you eat?" he asked again. She hesitated. There was only so much food in the kitchen for staff. And the boys. They were always hungry. Growing boys, you know. So I gave them my portions. I told myself I would eat later. But later never came. "You starved yourself to feed my children?" She didn't answer, just looked out the window. Marcus felt something break inside him. Not anger, not guilt. Something deeper. That afternoon, he called a family meeting. He gathered the twins, Clarice, and Noosa in the living room. Everyone sat. No one spoke. Marcus stood in the center of the room. He had never done anything like this before. He wasn't sure where to begin, so he just said the truth. "I've been a bad father." The twins looked up. Clarice looked down. Noosa shifted uncomfortably. "I thought that providing money was enough, that paying salaries on time was enough, that keeping the house running was enough." He paused. "It wasn't." He looked at his sons. "You needed me, and I wasn't there. I was too busy building an empire to notice that my own home was falling apart." He looked at Clarice. "And you. You gave everything you had to take care of my children. You gave your food, your sleep, your health. And I didn't even know your name." He looked at Noosa. "And you. You saw the signs. You saw her struggling. And you let it continue because it was convenient. Because the house kept running. Because no one complained. No one said anything." Marcus took a breath. "From now on, things are going to change." He laid out the new rules. Clarice would rest for at least 2 weeks. No work, no exceptions. Her medical expenses would be covered. Her mother would receive proper care, paid for by Marcus. When she returned, she would have a real contract. Defined hours, paid leave, health insurance, a salary that reflected the work she actually did, not the work she was originally hired to do. Noosa would supervise the staff more carefully. No one would be allowed to work themselves into the ground. No one would be punished for being sick. And Marcus himself would change his schedule. He would be home by 7 every night. He would eat dinner with his sons. He would be present. "I don't expect anyone to trust me right away," he said. "I haven't earned that. But I'm going to try." The weeks that followed were strange. Marcus kept his word. He came home early. He sat at the dinner table. He asked his sons about their day, and actually listened to the answers. At first, the boys were suspicious. They kept waiting for him to check his phone, to excuse himself for a call, to disappear into his office. But he didn't. He stayed. He listened. He laughed at their jokes, even the ones that didn't make sense. Slowly, the suspicion faded. Slowly, they started calling him Dad again instead of Sir. Clarice recovered. She started eating 3 meals a day, sleeping through the night, standing without dizziness. The color returned to her face. The strength returned to her body. The fear, slowly, began to leave her eyes. Marcus hired another woman to help with the heavy work. He raised Clarice's salary. He arranged regular checkups for her and her mother. Not as charity, as repair. One afternoon, about 3 months later, Clarice stood at the same gate where she had collapsed. But this time, everything was different. Her back was straight. Her breathing was steady. Her hands didn't tremble. The twins were playing in the garden nearby, laughing and chasing each other, their voices echoing across the property. Marcus walked up beside her. He stood quietly for a moment, looking at the stone path, the iron gate, the spot where he had found her lying motionless. "Do you remember that day?" he asked. She nodded. "I remember everything, sir. The fear, the exhaustion, the shame. But I also remember your sons crying, and you carrying me to the car. I thought I would be fired the next morning." He shook his head. "And I thought I was being a good man just because I paid on time." They stood in silence for a while. Then Marcus spoke again. "Clarice, I want to make you an offer. If you want to stay, I want you to stay. With a real contract, with real rights, with real rest. And if you want to leave, I'll understand. I'll write you a recommendation. I'll help however I can." He paused. "Because you saved my sons when I couldn't. You brought them back to life." Clarice looked at the gate, at the garden, at the twins running free. Then she looked at Marcus, at the man who had changed, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. And for the first time since she arrived at that mansion, she answered with a steady voice, "I'll stay, sir, but only if you promise me one thing. Anything. That you'll never let your children cry for help without noticing again, and that you'll never think paying on time is enough. Because it's not. It never was." She met his eyes. Presence is worth more than money. Always. Marcus nodded. "I promise." He extended his hand, not as an employer, but as someone who finally understood her value. She shook it firmly, sealing not a business deal, but a covenant of respect. The twins came running over, breathless from playing, and hugged them both at once. "We're having dinner together again tonight, right, Dad?" Marcus smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. "Every night from now on. because now I know what really matters, and I'm never going to forget again." He built an empire with contracts and meetings, with late nights and early flights, with numbers and negotiations and deals that made headlines. But he almost lost everything that mattered in the silence of his own home. It took a woman collapsing at his gate and 2 children crying harder for her than they ever did for their own mother to show him the truth. Paying on time is not enough. Providing is not enough. Presence is the only currency that counts. And some lessons only come when you're forced to carry someone to the hospital and realize you never even knew their name. The crown you wear in public means nothing if your own children don't recognize your face. And the legacy you build with money can crumble in a day, but the legacy you build with presence lasts forever. Some men spend their whole lives chasing success, climbing higher, reaching further, collecting titles and trophies and numbers that no one will remember. And then they die alone, because they forgot the simple truth. The people who love you don't need your money. They need your time. Marcus almost learned that lesson too late. But sometimes life gives you a second chance. Sometimes a stranger collapses at your gate, and your children scream her name, and you realize, finally, that you've been blind. He didn't waste his second chance. He came home. He stayed. He listened. He learned. And his sons. They stopped flinching when they heard footsteps in the hallway. Because now, when the door opened, they knew it was him. And he was staying.